The fluorescent lights of the Prescott nursing home hummed softly in the late afternoon of March 1962. Kate Brennan sat in her wheelchair by the window, her 98-year-old fingers tracing patterns on the armrest. Outside, the Arizona mountains stood purple against the fading sky, unchanged from the day she'd first seen them as a child. The young reporter, barely 25, shifted uncomfortably in the plastic chair across from her. His notebook lay open on his lap, pen poised, but the page remained blank. He'd been trying for 20 minutes to get her to talk. "Mrs. McAllister, our readers would love to hear about the Old West. You must have wonderful stories from those days." Kate's pale blue eyes still sharp as flint, despite the years fixed on him with an intensity that made him look away. The afternoon light caught the lines on her face, each one a map of survival, of choices made and prices paid. "Stories," she repeated, her voice like dry leaves rustling across stone. "You think the West was wonderful, boy? Well, I just thought, the adventure, the freedom." "You thought wrong." She turned back to the window, dismissing him with silence as complete as a slammed door. The reporter gathered his notebook, defeated. He'd driven 3 hours from Phoenix for this interview, chasing a lead about one of the last survivors of the wild frontier days. Now he had nothing but an old woman's contempt and wasted gas money. As he stood to leave, his foot caught the corner of the coffee table. A newspaper clipping fluttered to the floor, the image face up. It showed an old revolver displayed in the Prescott Historical Museum. The caption read, "Colt Peacemaker circa 1870, donor anonymous. Belonged to legendary Texas Ranger Jacob Brennan." Kate's hand shot out faster than seemed possible for a woman her age. She gripped the clipping, her knuckles white against the yellowed newsprint. Her breath caught just for an instant. "Where did you get this?" "The museum exhibit, ma'am. They're featuring Old West artifacts this month. Beautiful piece, isn't it? They say it belonged to a famous lawman." "That was my father's gun." Her voice cracked just slightly, showing the first hint of something beneath the armor. "Sit down, boy. Let me tell you how that pistol saved my life." The reporter sat fumbling with his notebook. Kate closed her eyes, and the years peeled away like skin from an onion. The nursing home faded. The fluorescent lights dimmed. And she was 23 again, standing in the snow. It was winter 1887. The snow fell on Eagle Canyon like a burial shroud, silent and complete. The Arizona Territory didn't see snow like that often, 3 feet in 3 days, turning the red rocks white and the world into something strange and terrible. Kate Brennan was 23 years old that winter. She stood 5 feet 3 inches in her boots, weighed maybe 110 pounds, soaking wet, and could put 6 rounds through a playing card at 50 paces. Her dark hair fell to her waist when she let it down, but she kept it braided tight, practical, out of the way. Her hands were calloused from rope and reins, her skin tanned from the desert sun despite the bonnets the town women insisted proper girls should wear. She wasn't a proper girl. She'd never been a proper girl. And that winter she'd become something else entirely. Her father, Jacob Brennan, had been 55 that winter. Once a Texas Ranger whose name meant something from the Pecos to the Colorado, he'd hung up his badge 15 years earlier. The killing had gotten to him, he told Kate. Too many mothers' sons in the ground because of his gun, too many widows weeping, too many children growing up without fathers. So he'd taken his savings and bought 80 acres in Eagle Canyon, Arizona Territory, far from any town, far from the railroad, far from the violence that had defined his life. He raised horses, good horses, Appaloosas and Paints and sturdy quarter horses that could work cattle all day and still have enough left to get you home. And he raised his daughter. Kate's mother had died bringing her into the world, a fact Jacob never let her forget, but never blamed her for either. Sarah Brennan had been the daughter of a rancher, tough as the land itself, and she'd known the risks. She'd made Jacob promise as she bled out in that rough cabin with the midwife weeping that he'd teach their daughter everything. How to survive, how to be strong, how to stand her ground in a world that would try to push her down. Jacob had kept that promise. By 10, Kate could track a deer through scrub brush, reading signs in the dust that most men would miss. By 12, she could shoot the hat off a fence post at 100 yards. By 15, she could break a wild Mustang without getting thrown gentle enough that the horse would trust her firm enough that it knew who was boss. "You're too wild for decent men," the women in Prescott would whisper when Kate rode into town for supplies. They said it like a curse, like a warning, like a prophecy of spinsterhood and loneliness. The shopkeepers' daughters with their parasols and corsets looked at her with something between pity and contempt. The young men looked at her with something else entirely, but none of them had the courage to speak to Jacob Brennan's daughter. Kate wore their whispers like a badge of honor. The snow came on a Tuesday in early December. The first flakes fell at dawn, light and playful. By noon the sky had turned the color of old pewter, and the snow fell in earnest. By nightfall, it was a blizzard, the wind howling down from the mountains like something alive and angry. Jacob had ridden out that morning to check the horses in the lower canyon, where they sheltered from the worst of the weather in a natural depression, with good grass and a spring that rarely froze. He'd said he'd be back by sunset. When midnight came and went with no sign of him, Kate knew something was wrong. Her father was many things, but careless wasn't one of them. She saddled Dancer, her Appaloosa mare, in the barn. The wind tried to tear the doors from her hands. Snow had already drifted 3 feet against the north wall. She dressed in layers, her father's old wool coat over her own 2 pairs of socks in her boots, a scarf wrapped around her face until only her eyes showed. She tied a rope around her waist, the other end to the saddle horn. If she fell, if Dancer spooked, at least they'd stay together. Then she rode out into the blizzard. The world had disappeared. Sky and ground merged into one white nothing. Kate gave Dancer her head, trusting the mare's instincts over her own failing sight. The cold was brutal, burning her lungs with each breath, turning her fingers numb despite her gloves. She found him 2 miles from the homestead, lying in a drift beside his horse. The animal stood over him, trembling, its breath steaming in the frozen air. Jacob's right leg bent at an angle. God never intended the bone clearly broken. His face was gray with cold and pain. "Damn fool horse spooked at a jackrabbit," he muttered through chattering teeth when Kate knelt beside him. Blood had frozen in his beard. "Threw me into the rocks. Leg snapped like a twig." Getting him onto Dancer was an agony that left him screaming and Kate crying. Getting him home took 4 hours of nightmare riding through the storm, Jacob tied to the saddle, Kate walking alongside because the mare couldn't carry them both through the drifts. By the time they reached the cabin, Jacob had passed out from the pain. Kate got him inside, got him in bed, got a fire roaring. Then she rode back out into the storm 3 miles to the nearest neighbor, old Mrs. Chen, who sent her grandson running for Doc Henderson in Prescott. The doctor arrived at dawn, exhausted, his buggy barely making it through the snow. He examined Jacob's leg while Kate held the lamp and tried not to look at the swelling, the purple bruising, the way the bone pressed against the skin. Doc Henderson was 68 years old. He'd stitched up half the bullet holes in Arizona, set more broken bones than he could count delivered babies, and closed the eyes of the dying. He shook his head after his examination, his face grim. "Jacob, that leg's infected already. Bones shattered in 3 places. If I don't take it off, you'll be dead in a week. The gangrene will spread." "Then I'll die," Jacob said simply, his voice flat and final. "I ain't living half a man. I ain't being a burden on my daughter. I'd rather go quick." "Pa, no," Kate started. "Katie, I've made my choice. I've seen what happens to cripples out here. I won't do it." They argued for an hour. Kate begged. Doc Henderson reasoned. Jacob remained unmoved. Finally, they tried a compromise. Herbs and poultices, willow bark tea for the pain, prayer, though none of them put much stock in it. Jacob survived, but barely. The leg never healed right. The infection receded but left damage in its wake. By spring of 1887, he couldn't walk without crutches, couldn't ride, couldn't work the horses, couldn't do any of the things that had defined his life. Kate did it all. She rose before dawn and collapsed after dark. Her hands bled from rope burns, her back screamed from hauling feed sacks. She broke 2 of the young horses that spring fell 4 times, got kicked once hard enough to leave a bruise the size of a dinner plate on her thigh. But she kept the ranch running, kept the horses fed and healthy, kept her father alive. The money ran out in April. Kate stood in the Prescott Bank on a Tuesday morning, hat in hand, before a banker whose mustache looked more expensive than her entire outfit. His office smelled of cigar smoke and furniture polish. Through the window she could see the spring sun turning the mountains gold. "Miss Brennan," the banker, a soft-handed man named Thaddeus, adjusted his spectacles. "Your father borrowed $400 last year to purchase breeding stock. The note is due at the end of May. I need more time. The horses aren't ready to sell yet. Another 6 months and I'll have animals worth twice what he paid. I can settle the debt and have money left over." The bank cannot extend credit indefinitely. We have our own obligations." He opened a ledger, ran his finger down a column of numbers. "You've missed 2 payments already. The board is concerned." "My father was injured. I've been managing alone. Surely that counts for something." "It counts for sympathy, Miss Brennan. But sympathy doesn't pay debts." He closed the ledger with a soft thump. "You have until the end of May. 6 weeks. If the note isn't satisfied, the bank will foreclose. I'm sorry." He didn't look sorry. Kate walked out of the bank into the spring sunshine and wanted to scream. 6 weeks. Impossible. The horses wouldn't be ready. Even if she sold everything, she'd be lucky to raise $300. And then what? No horses meant no income. No income meant losing the land anyway. She wasn't surprised when Clayton Morrison appeared at the ranch 3 days later. Clayton was 26, the son of Judge Thaddeus Morrison, the most powerful man in Yavapai County. Where Kate was rough edges and calloused hands, Clayton was polish and privilege. He sat a horse like he'd been born to it, wore clothes tailored in San Francisco, and had the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. He'd asked Kate to marry him 3 times in the past 2 years. She'd said no 3 times. He dismounted with practiced grace, removing his hat as he approached the porch where Kate stood, rifle casually cradled in her arms. Not aimed at him, not exactly, but present. A reminder. "Kate, I heard about your troubles." His smile was warm, sympathetic, and completely calculated. "The bank note. Your father's condition. I'm sorry. News travels fast. Prescott's a small town. People talk." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne. "Expensive. Eastern. I have a solution. Marry me. I'll pay off the bank note. Your father can live in comfort. You'll never want for anything." Kate had known this was coming, had rehearsed her answer a dozen times, but standing here with the weight of 6 weeks pressing down on her, with her father's future hanging in the balance, the words were harder than she'd expected. "I don't love you, Clayton. Love comes with time. What matters is respect, partnership, security. I can give you all of that." His smile widened, confident. "Think about it. No more breaking horses in the cold. No more worrying about money. Your father would have the best medical care. You could be a proper lady." "I don't want to be a proper lady." His smile thinned just slightly. "Then perhaps you'd consider selling. My father's been looking to expand. We'd pay fair market value for Eagle Canyon, $1,500. More than enough to settle your debts and set you up somewhere comfortable. Phoenix, perhaps. Or Tucson." Kate's knuckles whitened on the rifle. This land had belonged to her mother's family. Her grandfather had fought Apaches for it, had bled for it. Her father had built everything here with his own hands. The cabin, the barn, the corrals. Every fence post represented sweat and hope and dreams of something better. This land is not for sale. Kate, be reasonable. You can't run this place alone. Your father's crippled. You're a woman. There are limits to what you can... Get off my land." Clayton's expression hardened. The warm sympathy disappeared, replaced by something colder. He replaced his hat, settling it with deliberate care, taking his time. "You have 2 weeks before the banknote is due, Kate. Then the bank takes it all anyway. Think about that. Think about your father helpless with nowhere to go. No money. No home." He mounted his horse. "You're a stubborn woman. I've always admired that about you. But stubbornness doesn't pay bills. You'll regret this." She watched him ride away, the rifle still in her arms, her heart hammering. When the dust from his horse had settled, she went inside. Jacob was in his chair by the window watching. He'd heard everything. "You should have taken his offer," he said quietly. "Never." "Katie, I'm not worth this. I'm not worth you destroying your life. You're my father. This is our land. That's all that matters. Pride's an expensive thing. So's dignity." She put the rifle away, started making coffee. Her hands were shaking. "There has to be another way." That night she sat by her father's bed, the oil lamp casting shadows on the rough-hewn walls. Rain pattered on the roof. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called. "Tell me about the Dalton brothers," she said. Jacob's eyes, still sharp despite his pain, narrowed. "Why, I heard talk in town. They're wanted. $2,000. Kate, no. We need $400 to save the ranch. 2,000 would give us breathing room. Time to rebuild. We could hire help, buy medicine for your leg, maybe even get you to a real doctor in Phoenix. Those men are killers, professional outlaws. They've gunned down lawmen, stagecoach drivers, anyone who got in their way. They'd kill you before you got within 100 yards. You taught me to shoot. You taught me to track. You taught me to think tactically. I taught you to survive, not to hunt men like animals." He struggled to sit up, wincing as his leg moved. "This is madness. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about justice. They're wanted men, dead or alive. There's no law against collecting a bounty. There's a difference between law and right. You kill a man, even a bad man, it changes you. Something inside dies. I know. I've killed plenty." His hand gripped hers. "Katie, I've seen young rangers go out thinking they're heroes, thinking they're doing right. They come back different, hollowed out. The first kill stays with you forever. So does losing everything we've worked for." They sat in silence. The lamp sputtered. Outside, the rain grew heavier. "They're coming through Arizona," Kate said finally. "Everyone knows it. They hit the stage station in New Mexico 2 weeks ago. They always take the route through Echo Pass, then down toward Tucson. That means they'll pass through Eagle Canyon." "How do you know their route?" "I listen. I watch. Same as you taught me." She pulled out a hand-drawn map, spreading it on the bed. Her draftsmanship was crude but effective. "Here. The canyon narrows here. High walls on both sides. One rider at a time through the choke point. It's perfect for an ambush. You've said it yourself, that's the best defensive position for 50 miles. Jacob studied the map. Despite himself, she saw the old ranger in his eyes, calculating angles and lines of fire, assessing cover and fields of view. His fingers traced the canyon walls, the spring where travelers would stop. 4 men against 1 girl, he said softly. 4 men who don't know they're being hunted, who think they're safe this far from New Mexico, who won't expect a woman. She met his gaze. "You always said surprise is worth 10 men. Speed, surprise, and violence of action. I also said never fight unless you have to. We have to, Pa. We're out of options." He was quiet for a long time. The lamp burned lower. The rain became a downpour, hammering on the roof like judgment itself. "The Sharps," he said finally, his voice resigned. "You'll need the Sharps rifle for the first shot. Long-range knockdown power. 50 caliber will drop a man at 300 yards if you place it right. After that, the Winchester for follow-up. Keep the Colt on your hip for close work if it comes to that." "You're saying yes. I'm saying if you're determined to do this fool thing, you'll do it right or you won't come back at all." He reached under his pillow, pulled out the Colt Peacemaker he'd carried for 30 years. The walnut grips were worn smooth from use, dark with sweat and time. "This gun never failed me, Katie. It won't fail you. But you remember, every time you pull a trigger on a man, something inside you dies. You kill 4 men, even bad men, you won't ever be the same." She took the pistol. It was heavier than she expected, warm from being under the pillow. The metal had been polished by holster wear until it gleamed even in the dim lamplight. "I know, Pa." "Do you really?" His hand gripped hers with surprising strength. "Shooting tin cans and shooting a man who's looking back at you, who's got a family somewhere, who's scared and fighting for his life, those are different universes. Can you do it? When you see his face, see him as human, see him bleed, can you pull that trigger?" Kate thought of Clayton's smug smile, of the banker's dismissive tone, of her father's broken body once so strong, of her mother's grave on the hill where wildflowers grew in spring and the wind sang songs only the dead could hear. "Yes," she said, "I can." Over the next 3 days, Jacob transformed from invalid to strategist. The pain in his leg was constant, but he ignored it, focusing on the mission with the intensity of the ranger he'd once been. He had Kate sketch every detail of Eagle Canyon's geography, the height of the walls, the width of the pass, the location of cover, the angle of the sun at different times of day. He marked firing positions, escape routes, fields of fire. He drew diagrams showing how men would move under fire, where they'd take cover, how they'd try to flank her position. He made her practice with the Sharps until she could hit a man-sized target at 200 yards, then 250, then 300. The rifle kicked like a mule, and by the second day her shoulder was purple with bruises, but her accuracy improved with every shot. He drilled her on combat breathing, on how to slow her heart rate when the adrenaline hit, on counting rounds and reloading under pressure, on the difference between cover and concealment, on how to tell if a man was really down or just playing possum. "You get one mistake," he told her on the third day, his face gray with exhaustion. "Maybe. These men have survived a dozen gunfights each. They're not lucky. They're good. Better than most lawmen. You have to be perfect." "I will be." "No, you won't. Nobody's perfect in combat. But you can be good enough. You can stack the odds, use the terrain, use surprise, use the fact they won't expect a woman. And Katie," he gripped her hand, "when it starts, don't hesitate. Don't think. Just do. Hesitation kills." On the fourth morning, Kate rose before dawn. She dressed in her father's old clothes, loose-fitting and dark. Brown canvas pants, a dark blue work shirt, a battered hat that had seen better days. She braided her hair tight and tucked it up under the hat. From a distance in shadow she might pass for a young man. She loaded the weapons with methodical care. The sharps took paper cartridges, fiddly to load but devastating when they hit. She had 20 rounds. The Winchester used brass cartridges, 44 caliber. She had a box of 50. The Colt took the same ammunition as the Winchester. Another 50 rounds. 160 rounds total. Enough for a small war. She packed jerky hardtack dried apples, 2 canteens of water, a wool blanket, matches in a waterproof tin, her father's old field glasses. Jacob sat in his wheelchair on the porch as she mounted Dancer. The sun was just touching the eastern peaks, turning them gold and crimson. The air smelled of pine and dust and the promise of heat to come. "Aim for the heart, Katie. Hesitation kills." "I know." "Remember, 4 men, 1 girl. You can't afford to miss. Not once." "I won't." "Make every shot count." His voice broke slightly, the first crack in the Ranger's armor. "Come back to me." She wanted to say something profound, something that would comfort him if she never returned, something about love or legacy or the land they'd fought for, but the words stuck in her throat, inadequate and small against the enormity of what she was about to do. So she just nodded, touched her hat brim in salute, and turned Dancer toward the canyon. She didn't look back. If she had, she would have seen the tears on her father's weathered cheeks. She would have seen him raise one hand in blessing or farewell. She would have seen him sit there until she disappeared into the morning light, then for an hour after, as if watching could protect her across the miles. What Kate didn't see, couldn't have seen from that distance, was the figure watching from the ridge a half-mile to the south. Clayton Morrison sat, his black gelding in the shadow of a juniper, a brass telescope to his eye. He'd been watching the Brennan ranch since before dawn, patient as a spider. He watched Kate ride toward Eagle Canyon armed and purposeful. He watched Jacob wheel himself back inside the cabin, broken and helpless. Then Clayton smiled, lowered the telescope, and turned his horse toward town. He had a telegram to send. 4 men were coming through Arizona territory, and he'd just been handed an unexpected gift. With Kate Brennan dead in a shootout with outlaws, the land would go to auction for the bank debts, and Clayton Morrison would be first in line to buy the only bidder with ready cash and connections. Sometimes Providence smiled on the patient. Kate reached Eagle Canyon by mid-morning. The walls rose 200 feet on either side, red sandstone striped with white and ochre. The pass was a quarter-mile long, narrowing to barely 15 feet at the choke point, a natural fortress, a killing ground. She hobbled Dancer in a side canyon where grass and water were plentiful, hidden from the main trail. The mare would be safe there, out of the line of fire. Then she climbed. The rock face was treacherous, crumbling sandstone that shifted under her weight. She moved slowly, testing each handhold, each foothold. 60 feet up, 80, 100. Her arms burned, her fingers ached. She reached her chosen position, a shelf of rock 50 feet up the western wall with a clear view of the approach and good cover from return fire. She settled in with the sharps across her knees and began to wait. The first day passed with agonizing slowness. Nothing moved in the canyon except lizards and the shadows of circling hawks. The sun baked the rocks until they were too hot to touch. Kate sipped water, sparingly ate jerky that tasted like leather. The second day, a freight wagon came through, the driver whistling tunelessly. Kate pressed herself flat against the rock, praying he wouldn't look up. He didn't. The wagon creaked past wheels, crunching on stone, and disappeared toward Tucson. The third day brought rain cold and miserable. Kate huddled under her oilcloth, shivering, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe the Daltons had changed their route. Maybe the information was wrong. Maybe she was a fool, chasing ghosts while her father sat alone and dying, and Clayton Morrison circled like a vulture. On the fourth day they came. Kate saw them first as dust on the horizon, 4 riders moving at an easy pace through the desert scrub. Her heart hammered. Her mouth went dry. She pressed herself flat against the rock, breathing shallow, watching through a gap in the stone. They came closer. 4 men just as the wanted posters had described. She recognized them even from this distance by the way they sat their horses, by the weapons they carried, by the casual confidence of men who'd killed and never paid the price. Jack Dalton, Road Point. 35 years old, tall and lean, with a black beard that hadn't seen a barber in months. He wore 2 pistols cross-draw style and carried a Winchester across his saddle. The leader. The brain. Wanted in 3 territories for robbery and murder. $500 dead or alive. Behind him came Garrett Dalton, the oldest at 32. Big as a barn door with shoulders that strained his shirt. He cradled a shotgun like a baby, and Kate knew from the reports that he favored it for close work. Brutal, efficient, deadly within 30 feet. $600. The youngest brother Wyatt rode third. 28, still baby-faced beneath trail dust, but his hands never strayed far from the matched Colts on his hips. Fast. The posters said he'd killed 2 deputies in Albuquerque, both dead before they cleared leather. $400. And bringing up the rear, Uncle Seth Drummond. Not really their uncle, just an old outlaw who'd ridden with their father back in the 50s. 55, graying, but his eyes scanned the terrain constantly. A survivor. A man who'd lived this long by being careful, by seeing trouble before it saw him. $500. $2,000 total. Kate's salvation. Or her death. They reached the spring at the base of the canyon, exactly where Kate had predicted. The horses needed water after the long desert crossing. The men needed rest. It was noon, the sun directly overhead, no shadows to hide in. Perfect. Kate watched them dismount, watched them loosen their saddles, stretch their backs, pass a canteen. Garrett knelt by the spring, cupping water to his mouth. Seth checked the horse's hooves. Wyatt rolled a cigarette, his fingers quick and practiced. Jack walked to the edge of the spring, looking up at the canyon walls with the wariness of a man who'd survived too many ambushes. But he didn't look high enough. They were relaxed, laughing about something. Just men, Kate thought. Just human beings who probably had mothers who loved them, maybe wives, maybe children. Seth was old enough to have grandchildren. Her hands began to shake. The sharps felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She'd practiced this shot 100 times on targets, on rocks, on fence posts. Never on a man. Never on something that would bleed and scream and die and leave a widow somewhere crying. Garrett was the biggest target. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Take the biggest threat first, the one who can hurt you most. Garrett, with his shotgun, could shred her position if he got close enough to use it. She settled the sharps against her shoulder, feeling the familiar wood against her cheek. Found Garrett in the sights. He was kneeling by the spring, cupping water to his mouth. 180 yards, a clean shot, broadside, center mass. Her finger touched the trigger, pressed slightly. The trigger had a 4-pound pull. She'd need 3 more pounds of pressure, and Garrett Dalton would be dead. She couldn't do it. Her breath came fast, shallow. Her heart hammered so loud she was sure they'd hear it down below. Sweat stung her eyes despite the cool air in the shadow of the rocks. This was murder. This was killing a man for money. What was she? A bounty hunter, an assassin, her father's daughter, or something darker. Then she thought of her father. Crippled, helpless, facing eviction in 2 weeks. She thought of her mother's grave, the land her family had bled for. She thought of Clayton Morrison's smug face, counting on her to fail to die, to simply disappear so he could sweep in and buy her home for pennies. Kate closed her eyes, breathed deep, remembered her father's words from 100 shooting lessons. They're just targets, Katie. When you aim, you don't see a person. You see a point, a place to put the bullet. Everything else is just noise. She opened her eyes. Garrett was still drinking, still a target, still the mission. She exhaled half a breath, held it. The world narrowed to the front sight, to the target, to the point where metal would meet flesh. She squeezed. The sharps roared like thunder in the canyon. The heavy .50 caliber bullet crossed 180 yards in a fraction of a heartbeat faster than sound, carrying half a ton of energy. It struck Garrett high in the left shoulder, shattering bone, tearing through muscle. He spun like a top, the shotgun flying from his hands, and went down hard. His scream echoed off the canyon walls, primal and terrible. For a frozen instant, the other three men simply stared. Their brains couldn't process what had happened. Men don't fall down for no reason. Guns don't fire themselves. Then training and instinct took over like a flood breaking through a dam. Jack Dalton moved first, diving behind a boulder even as his hand reached for his Winchester. Wyatt went left, rolling into a depression in the ground, both Colts clearing leather with practiced speed. Uncle Seth, the old survivor, didn't waste time looking for the shooter. He just ran sprinting for the horses 30 feet away, knowing that whoever had fired that shot would be reloading. Kate was already moving. She dropped the sharps and grabbed the Winchester, levering around into the chamber with a metallic snap that seemed impossibly loud. Her father had drilled this into her until it was muscle memory. Never stay in one position after you fire. The smoke gives you away. The sound echoes, but men can still triangulate. Move or die. She scrambled 10 feet to her right along the shelf, moving to a different gap in the rocks. Below she could see Garrett crawling toward cover, leaving a blood trail dark against the pale sand. Jack was behind the boulder, scanning the canyon walls with the intensity of a hunting cat. Wyatt had disappeared into the depression, invisible. Seth had reached the horses and was yanking at his rifle scabbard. Seth was the immediate threat. A rifle in trained hands could reach her at this distance. She put the Winchester's front sight on his chest, just below the collarbone, breathed, fired. The shot was perfect. The bullet took Seth through the sternum, punching through his heart. He staggered backward 3 steps, hit the ground, tried to rise, and fell again. He didn't move after that, didn't twitch, didn't breathe, just lay still in the dust like a discarded coat. 2 shots, 2 down, and now they knew where she was. The return fire was instant and terrifying. Jack's Winchester barked 3 times in rapid succession, bullets spanging off the rocks around her position with sounds like cracked bells. Wyatt rose from his depression long enough to empty both Colts in her direction, 12 rounds in maybe 5 seconds. Most went wild, but 2 struck close enough to shower her with stone fragments that cut her cheek and left her ears ringing. Kate pressed herself flat, tasting blood and dust and the copper tang of fear. Her ears rang from the gunfire. Below she heard Jack shouting orders, his voice cutting through the chaos with the authority of a man used to command. "High and west rocks. She's in the damn rocks." She. He'd said she. How did he know? No time to wonder. Kate Leopard crawled along the shelf, moving toward the southern end where another outcrop would give her a different angle. The Winchester scraped against stone. Her knees found every sharp edge. Behind her she could hear bullets chewing up her previous position, the methodical sound of men who knew where you'd been, but not where you were going. She reached the new position, peered over the edge. The angle was better here, more acute. She could see into the depression where Wyatt had taken cover, could see Jack's boulder from the side, though not enough to get a clear shot. Could see Garrett now behind a fallen log, pressing his hand to his shoulder, his face twisted with pain and rage. But she couldn't see them clearly enough for a killing shot. They'd learned. They weren't exposing themselves. This was a stalemate. And as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Kate realized with growing dread that stalemate favored them. When darkness came, they could move, could climb, could surround her position from multiple directions. She'd be trapped on this shelf with nowhere to run, no way to watch every approach, and come dawn they'd kill her like shooting a trapped animal. She had to do something before nightfall, something they wouldn't expect. Jack Dalton crouched behind the boulder, his mind racing through possibilities with the speed of long practice. One shooter, probably alone. Good with a rifle, very good. That first shot on Garrett had been surgical, and the second shot had dropped Seth like a stone. 2 for 2. Professional-level accuracy. But who was hunting them? A lawman who'd tracked them from New Mexico, a bounty hunter who'd gotten word of their route. Another outlaw with a grudge over some past slight? Wyatt. He called, his voice carefully controlled. "You see anything?" "Nothing. But I heard the rifle lever. Winchester, I think. .44 caliber from the sound." "Garrett, how bad you hit?" "Shoulders torn up. I can move, but I can't shoot for shit." His voice was tight with pain and blood loss. "Jack, we gotta get out of here. We're sitting ducks." "Not in daylight. That rifleman will pick us off one by one the moment we break cover." Jack studied the western wall, trying to pinpoint the exact position. The shelf was obvious now, 50 feet up, good cover, commanding view of the entire lower canyon. Classic ambush position, textbook perfect. "We wait for dark, then we flank. Wyatt goes left, I go right. We climb up quiet. Whoever this is, they can't watch both directions at once." "What about me?" Garrett's voice was getting weaker. "You stay here. Keep pressure on that wound. When we move, you fire at that shelf. Keep them pinned. You don't have to hit anything. Just make noise, keep their head down." "I can do that." Jack checked the sun. 2 hours to sunset, maybe less. 2 hours to plan, to think, to figure out who had set this trap and how to turn it around. He'd been in worse situations. That mess in Dodge City with the 3 Rangers who'd ambushed them outside the saloon. The firefight outside Santa Fe when the posse had them cornered in an arroyo and they'd had to shoot their way out, leaving 2 deputies dead. He'd survived all of it by staying calm, staying smart, not panicking when the bullets flew. But something bothered him. Something about this whole setup felt wrong. The location was too perfect, the timing too precise. The shooter had known exactly where they'd stop, exactly when they'd arrive. This wasn't random. This wasn't luck. Someone had known they were coming. Kate watched the sun drop lower, painting the canyon walls orange and red and gold. She was running out of time. Her water was half gone. Her ammunition was plentiful, but bullets meant nothing if she couldn't see targets. And as shadows lengthened across the canyon floor, she knew they were planning their move, coordinating, getting ready to hunt her in the darkness. She studied the terrain again with desperate intensity, looking for options she'd missed. The shelf she was on connected to a narrow ledge that ran along the canyon wall, barely visible from below. Dangerous, barely wide enough for one person, crumbling in places. But it led down and around to the back side of where Garrett lay wounded. If she could reach that position, she'd have a clear shot. Maybe even get close enough to use the Colt end this decisively before full dark. But leaving the high ground was insane. Everything her father had taught her said stay high, stay protected, use the advantage of elevation. Going down was suicide, walking into their trap, unless they expected her to stay up. Kate made her decision. She pulled off her boots, tied them to her belt. Barefoot would be quieter on the rocks, less likely to dislodge pebbles that would give her away. She slung the Winchester across her back and drew the Colt. For what she was about to do, the pistol made more sense. Close range, personal. She began to descend. The ledge was worse than she'd thought. 6 inches wide, in places the sandstone crumbling under her weight like stale bread. She pressed her body against the wall, moving sideways, feeling with her toes for stable holds. 60 feet below the canyon floor waited with its rocks and certain death. Don't look down, just move. 1 foot, then the other. Breathe. Move. Don't think about falling. She was halfway down when a rock gave way under her right foot. She slipped her weight suddenly unsupported, and for a terrible instant she was falling. Her hands scrabbled at the wall, finding a handhold more by luck than skill. She hung there, feet dangling, arms burning, her heart trying to explode out of her chest. Pebbles rattled down the cliff face, striking rocks below with tiny clicks that seemed loud as gunshots in the growing silence. Not loud, but in the quiet of evening, with the wind dying, sound carried. Kate froze, listened, heard nothing for a long moment, then heard Wyatt's voice, young and nervous. "You hear that?" "Rocks fall sometimes," Jack replied, but he didn't sound convinced. "Stay alert." Kate waited until her hands stopped shaking enough to trust them, then continued down. The ledge widened slightly, then curved around a buttress of stone. She followed it with agonizing slowness, and suddenly she could see into Garrett's position from above and behind. He sat with his back to the log, one hand pressed to his wounded shoulder, the other holding a pistol loosely. His face was pale beneath the trail dirt, sheened with sweat despite the cooling air. He'd lost blood, a lot of it. The ground around him was dark and wet with it. Kate raised the Colt, 20 feet. An easy shot. She could end him right now. Pull the trigger, and Garrett Dalton would join his uncle in whatever afterlife awaited men who'd killed for money. But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at something in his other hand, the one not holding the pistol. Kate squinted in the fading light. A photograph. Crumpled and stained with blood, but she could make out two figures, a woman holding a baby. Garrett spoke so soft Kate barely heard him over the whisper of wind. "I'm sorry, Mary. I'm so sorry. Tell Sarah her daddy tried. Tell her I loved her." Her hand wavered. This man had a wife, a child, a life beyond the wanted posters and the crimes and the $200 in bounty money. He was human, real, a father who'd never see his daughter grow up. And she was about to kill him. Then she remembered why she was here. These men were murderers. They'd killed a stage driver in New Mexico just 2 weeks ago, an old man named Potter, who'd driven that route for 20 years. Shot him in the back for a strongbox with $300. Left him to die in the desert, his body found 2 days later by buzzards. This wasn't murder. This was justice. This was the price of the choices Garrett Dalton had made. Kate stepped forward onto a small outcrop. Her bare foot scraped stone just slightly. Just enough. Garrett's head snapped around, eyes going wide. For a frozen instant they stared at each other. Him seeing death, her seeing a father. "Don't move," Kate said, the Colt steady now aimed at his chest. Garrett stared, then his face twisted with shock and something that might have been recognition. "You're a woman. Drop your gun. Slow." He let the pistol fall from his fingers, raised his good hand. The wounded shoulder wouldn't lift. "Lady, you just killed my uncle. Shot me. What do you want?" "The bounty. $2,000. Understanding dawned in his eyes, mixed with something like respect. "You're hunting us for money. Set up this whole ambush for bounty. I'm hunting you because you're killers. The money's just what makes it legal." Garrett laughed, a bitter sound that turned into a cough. Blood flecked his lips. "We're killers. You just put a bullet in me and another in Seth. You're standing there ready to shoot me in cold blood. How's that different? You murdered an innocent man. I'm collecting on your crimes. That's the difference. That driver wasn't innocent. He was carrying stolen gold from a mine that worked men to death for pennies. We took from thieves." Garrett's voice was getting weaker, slurred. "You think you're better than us because you got the law on your side? You're just another killer with a cleaner conscience." Kate's finger tightened on the trigger. "Last words?" "Yeah." Garrett's eyes flicked past her just for an instant. "Behind you." It was the oldest trick in the world. Distraction. Misdirection. Kate didn't fall for it. Didn't turn. Didn't take her eyes off Garrett for even a second, who smiled through blood-stained teeth. Worth a try. Then his hand moved fast, despite the wound reaching not for the pistol on the ground, but for something at his boot. A knife. Small, wickedly sharp, the blade catching the last light. Kate didn't think, didn't hesitate, just pulled the trigger. The Colt bucked in her hand. The bullet took Garrett through the heart at 20 feet, punching through bone and muscle and the photograph he still clutched. He slumped against the log, the knife falling from nerveless fingers. The photograph fluttered to the ground beside him now, with a hole through the center where the bullet had passed through. The gunshot echoed through the canyon like a bell tolling. Kate stood frozen, staring at what she'd done. The first shot from the sharps had been distant, abstract, almost impersonal at 180 yards. This was close. She could see his eyes lose focus. Could see the exact moment life left him. Could see the photograph of his wife and daughter now ruined, lying in his blood. She'd just killed a man, face to face, up close, personal, and the world didn't end. The sky didn't fall, lightning didn't strike her down. She just felt empty, like something vital had been carved out of her chest and replaced with cold stone. Then she heard Jack's voice, sharp with command and grief. That came from Garrett's position. "She's down there. Move, move." Kate ran. She scrambled back toward the ledge, the Colt still in her hand, her bare feet finding holds from memory and desperation. Behind her she heard boots on stone, heard Wyatt's voice, young and furious and breaking. "She killed him. She killed Garrett. I'll kill her. I'll kill her." "Focus," Jack snapped. "Spread out. She can't watch both of us. Wyatt left. I'll go right. We flank her position and finish this." Kate reached the ledge and started to climb. Her feet slipped on the stone. Her hands were shaking. Behind her she could hear them getting closer, climbing, hunting. The advantage had shifted. She was the prey now. The ledge narrowed to nothing. She'd reached a dead end, the rock face rising sheer and impossible above her. Behind her she could hear them getting closer. Before her empty air and a 60-foot drop onto rocks that would shatter her bones like glass. She looked around desperately. There. A crack in the rock face barely wide enough for a person, more of a fissure than a cave, but it went back into darkness. She could hide there, wait for them to pass, or make a final stand if they found her. Kate squeezed into the crack. It was tight, scraping her shoulders, tearing her shirt, but she forced herself deeper into the darkness. The stone closed around her like a tomb. She turned, pressing her back to the stone the Colt pointed at the entrance 6 feet away, and waited. Jack Dalton reached the shelf 5 minutes later. He moved carefully, Winchester ready, every sense alert for ambush. Wyatt came up from the other side, both Colts drawn, his face twisted with grief and rage. They met in the middle where Kate had fired her first shots. Empty brass casings on the ground, scuff marks in the dust where she'd moved positions. A few drops of blood, probably from a stone fragment during the return fire. But no shooter. "She was here," Wyatt said, his voice shaking. "Where'd she go?" Jack studied the ledge with a tracker's eye. Saw where it led along the wall, saw where it ended at the sheer face. Saw the crack in the rock face, dark and promising. A hiding place. Or a trap. He smiled coldly. "Got you." He approached the crack, slowly keeping to one side, using the angle so she couldn't shoot him straight on. Wyatt circled to the other side. Crossfire. If she was in there, she was finished. No way out. No way to watch both directions. "Come out," Jack called, his voice echoing in the growing darkness. "You're trapped. No way out. You come out now, we'll make it quick. 1 bullet. You won't feel it. You make us come in there, it'll be slow. We'll make you pay for Garrett, for Seth. You'll beg for death before we're done." Silence from the crack. Jack fired twice into the darkness, aiming high so the bullets would ricochet off the stone inside. The reports were deafening in the confined space, the ricochets whining like angry hornets. Still nothing. No scream, no return fire, nothing. "Your call," he said. Then to Wyatt, "Watch that opening. She tries to run, cut her down. Don't aim for the body. Aim for the legs. I want her alive." Jack worked his way to the crack's entrance, took a deep breath, spun around the corner, Winchester raised and ready. Empty. The fissure went back 15 feet and ended in solid rock. No one there. No way out. No shooter. "She's not here," he called back, confusion and anger mixing in his voice. "That's impossible. We saw her come this way." "Well, she ain't here now." Jack backed out, his mind racing. He looked along the ledge again, really looked this time, not just at the obvious places, but at the impossible ones, and saw, just barely visible in the twilight, a handhold carved into the rock face above the crack, then another about 3 feet higher, and another above that, leading up toward the canyon rim 30 feet above. "She climbed," he said with reluctant admiration. "She's above us. Went up instead of hiding." They looked up. The rock face rose to the canyon rim, difficult but not impossible. In daylight, with good handholds, a strong climber could make it. In darkness, it was suicide. But when they reached the spot directly below where the handholds led, they found fresh scrapes in the stone. Boot prints in the dust, small, narrow. A woman's boots. And drops of blood more than before. Not much. Maybe from a scraped hand during the climb or a cut from the earlier stone fragments. "She's hurt," Wyatt said, his voice eager and vicious. "We can track her, hunt her down, make her pay. Not in the dark, and not up there." Jack looked at the canyon rim, at the vast broken country beyond. Easy to get lost in daylight, easy to get dead at night. "We go up there right now, we'll break our necks or walk into another ambush. She knows this country. We don't. She's got the advantage. So we just let her go. She killed Garrett, killed Uncle Seth. Your brother is dead because of her. We don't let anything go." Jack's voice was cold iron forged in years of violence. "We wait for dawn, then we track her, and when we find her, when we catch her, we make her pay for every drop of my brother's blood. Slow, personal. She'll wish she'd died in this canyon." Wyatt kicked a rock, frustrated and grieving, but he knew Jack was right. His brother had always been right about tactics. "What about the horses, our gear?" "We go back down, make camp at the spring, bury Garrett and Seth proper. They deserve that much. Then at first light we hunt." They descended as the last light left the sky, working their way down the rock face in near darkness, feeling for holds more than seeing them. Made their way back to where their brothers lay dead in the dust. Wyatt knelt beside Garrett's body, closing his eyes with gentle fingers, picking up the photograph that lay beside him. The bullet had punched through the center, right through the woman's face. The baby was untouched. "He talked about them all the time," Wyatt said softly, his voice thick. "Mary and little Sarah. Said he was doing this for them. Said one more job, one more score, and he'd have enough to go straight. Buy a little place in California. Raise oranges. Be a father. We all say that." Jack looked down at his brother's body, his face hard. "Never works out. This life, it doesn't let you go. You can't just walk away. It follows you." They buried both men in shallow graves, the ground too hard for anything deeper, marked them with stones they found at the spring, said words that didn't mean much but felt necessary anyway. The Lord's Prayer, though neither of them put much stock in the Lord. Then they built a small fire, ate cold beans straight from the tin, and sat in silence. "Jack," Wyatt said after a while, staring into the flames, "that shooter, the way they moved, the shots, the tactics, that ain't no lawman." "I know. And they knew we were coming, knew our route, knew exactly where we'd stop. This was planned, set up. We walked right into it." "I know that too. So who'd know that much about us, about our route, and why would they care enough to set an ambush?" Jack stared into the fire, not answering immediately. In his pocket he carried a letter. He'd received it 3 weeks ago in Albuquerque, delivered by a Mexican boy who said a well-dressed man had paid him 2 bits to hand it over. The letter was short and unsigned, written on expensive paper in educated script. "The Brennan woman at Eagle Canyon has money and land. She's alone except for a crippled father. Worth your time. She rides into Prescott first Tuesday of each month for supplies. Easy pickings. The ranch is isolated. No neighbors for miles. No one would know." At the time, Jack had thought it was a tip about a target, a setup for an easy score. Rob the woman on the road, take whatever money she had, maybe hold the father for ransom if he was worth anything. But now he wondered, what if it wasn't a tip about a victim? What if it was bait? What if someone had wanted them to come to Eagle Canyon knowing someone would be waiting, knowing there'd be a fight? "Jack," Wyatt was watching him, waiting for an answer. "That we've been played?" "Yeah." Jack pulled the letter from his pocket. Read it again by firelight, looking for clues he'd missed the first time. No signature, no return address. But the paper was expensive, thick, and cream-colored. The handwriting was educated, practiced, the script of someone who'd been to school back east. This wasn't from some desperate farmer or vengeful lawman. This was from someone with money, someone with plans, someone who'd wanted the Daltons at Eagle Canyon. "The woman who shot at us," Jack said, slowly thinking it through. "I got a good look at her, just for a second, when she was at Garrett's position. Young, mid-20s maybe, dark hair, small, good-looking from what I could see through the dust and blood. So the letter mentioned a Brennan woman at Eagle Canyon, alone except for a crippled father, land and money." Wyatt's eyes widened as understanding hit. "You think the shooter is the target? That she's this Brennan woman?" "I think someone wanted us dead and her blamed for it. Or her dead and us blamed. Either way, someone's playing a bigger game than we know, using us as pawns." Who would do that?" Jack reread the letter, his mind working through the possibilities. "Your father taught you good," he'd said earlier when the bullets were flying. He'd said it without thinking, reflexive mockery. But how had he known about her father? Because whoever sent the letter had told him more than what was written, had told him in person, had met him in that saloon in Socorro 3 weeks ago, bought him drinks, made his pitch. The man had been well-dressed, mid-20s, arrogant in the way of men who'd never been told no. He'd said his name was Morrison, Clayton Morrison, said his father was a judge in Prescott, said Kate Brennan had something he wanted, good land with water and grass, and she was too stubborn to sell. An unfortunate accident would solve his problem. The Daltons would get $500 now, another $500 after the job was done. Make it look like outlaws stumbled on an isolated ranch. Do what outlaws do. No one would ask questions. Jack had taken the money because $500 was $500. He hadn't cared about the politics about why some rich man's son wanted a woman's land. Money was money. The job was the job. But now his brothers were dead. Seth was dead. And he'd been outplayed by a woman half his size who'd turned his own trap against him. The woman hadn't been an easy target. She'd been a warrior. And someone had known that, had counted on it, had used the Daltons as weapons and Kate Brennan as the trigger, hoping they'd destroy each other. His name was Clayton, Jack said, his voice quiet and deadly. Clayton Morrison, from Prescott. Said his father was Judge Thaddeus Morrison. Paid me $500 to kill the Brennan woman. Promised another $500 after. Wyatt stared at his brother, disgust and anger warring on his face. You took a job from some rich kid to murder a woman for her land. I've done worse for less. Jack's voice was flat matter of fact. No pride, no shame, just stating reality. But I don't like being used, and I don't like my brothers dying because some fancy boy wanted to steal property. So what do we do? Jack thought about it. Thought about Kate Brennan up there in the darkness, bleeding, scared, probably thinking she'd won. Thought about Clayton Morrison back in Prescott, smiling, counting on the Daltons to finish the job or die trying. Either outcome suited Morrison fine. If the Daltons killed Kate, he got the land. If Kate killed the Daltons, she'd hang for murder and he'd still get the land. Win-win for Morrison. Lose-lose for everyone else. And Jack thought about Garrett, who'd never see his wife again, never hold his daughter. About Seth, who'd deserved better than a bullet from ambush after 30 years of surviving by being careful. We kill them both, Jack said finally. The woman for revenge, Morrison for betrayal. How she's better than us. We've lost half our guns. We're down to 2 men, and Morrison's in town, probably surrounded by his daddy's people and the law. We use our heads instead of our guns. Jack poked the fire with a stick, watching sparks rise into the darkness. Brennan's hurt, alone. She'll have to go back to her ranch eventually. Can't live up on that rim forever. We follow her trail careful-like, and when she gets home, when she thinks she's safe, we burn her out. No fancy shooting, no more ambushes, just fire and patience. Smoke her out like a badger. And Morrison? We go to town, tell him we did the job. The Brennan woman's dead. Collect the second half of our money. Then we kill him quiet somewhere nobody will find the body. Jack smiled, without warmth, without humanity. I'm thinking the desert, about 30 miles out. Let the buzzards and coyotes have him. By the time anyone finds anything, there won't be enough left to identify. Wyatt nodded slowly. It was a good plan. Brutal, efficient, the kind of plan that had kept them alive this long. When do we start? Dawn. We track her to the ranch, see what we're dealing with. Then we wait for nightfall and finish this. Jack lay back, using his saddle as a pillow. The ground was hard and cold. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. But neither of them slept well. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying the smell of blood and death. The fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows that looked like ghosts. And somewhere in the darkness above them, Kate Brennan sat with her back to stone, the Colt in her lap, watching the stars wheel overhead. She'd killed 3 men today. 3 human beings who'd had names, lives, people who'd loved them. Her hands should have been shaking. She should have been crying sick with guilt and horror at what she'd become. Instead, she felt nothing, just a cold, empty space where her fear had been. Her father had been right. Killing changed you. Something inside her had died with each pull of the trigger, and she wasn't sure what would grow back in its place, or if anything would. But she was alive, and she had $600 in bounty money coming if she could get these bodies to a lawman. Not the full $2,000, but enough to pay off the bank. Enough to save Eagle Canyon. Enough to give her father time. Assuming she survived the climb down in the morning. Assuming Jack and Wyatt didn't catch her. Assuming she could live with what she'd become. Kate looked at her hands in the starlight. They were steady, calloused from work, stained with powder residue and dried blood. A killer's hands now. "I'm sorry, Pa," she whispered to the night wind. "But I did what had to be done." The wind carried her words away into the darkness. Below, the Dalton brothers slept fitfully beside the graves of their kin. And 8 miles away in Prescott, Clayton Morrison sat in his study drinking expensive brandy, counting the hours until his plan reached its conclusion. None of them knew that the real story was just beginning. None of them knew that fate had other plans. And none of them knew that sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted, and justice wears a woman's face. Kate descended from the canyon rim as the first gray light touched the eastern sky. Her hands were raw, her feet bloody from the barefoot climb, and exhaustion pulled at her like gravity trying to drag her down into the earth. But she moved with purpose, working her way down the rock face using handholds that seemed impossibly small in the growing daylight. She'd spent the night on the rim, wedged between two boulders, the Colt across her chest and her finger on the trigger. Sleep had come in brief, nightmare-filled intervals, measured in minutes rather than hours. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Garrett's face, saw the light leave his eyes, heard the echo of the gunshot that had ended his life, saw the photograph of his wife and daughter lying in his blood. By dawn, she'd made a decision. She couldn't go back to Eagle Canyon. Not yet. Not directly. Jack and Wyatt would be watching the trails waiting for her like wolves waiting for wounded prey. They knew she had to return eventually. Her father was there, her home, everything she was fighting for, but she couldn't lead them straight to him. So she'd go to Prescott first, get the bounty on the bodies, get help. Maybe Sheriff Hawkins would send deputies to escort her home, or at least warn Jack and Wyatt that lawmen were looking for them, make them think twice about continuing the hunt. It took her 3 hours to work her way back down to the canyon floor, climbing in reverse the route she'd taken up in desperate flight. She approached the spring, carefully circling wide through the scrub, watching for movement, for the glint of metal, for anything that might indicate an ambush. The spring was empty. The Dalton Brothers' camp was abandoned. But she could see fresh graves marked with stones, mounded earth still dark with moisture. They'd buried their dead. That surprised her more than it should have. Outlaws didn't usually take the time for such niceties. It spoke of something human in them, something that made her chest tighten with an emotion she didn't want to name. Grief, maybe, or guilt, or the terrible recognition that the men she'd killed had been more than just targets. She found Dancer where she'd left her in the side canyon, grazing peacefully on the good grass. The mare nickered softly, and Kate pressed her face against the warm neck, breathing in the familiar smell of horse and leather and home. The simple comfort of it almost broke her. "Good girl," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Let's go get paid for the worst thing I've ever done." She retrieved Seth's body first, dragging it with difficulty to where she'd tied Dancer. The old man was heavy dead weight. Then Garrett's even heavier, his shirt still wet with blood. She couldn't manage both on the horse, so she made 2 trips, leading Dancer slowly, the bodies draped over the saddle. Loading them took an hour of hard work that left her hands bloody and her back screaming, but finally she had both secured, tied down so they wouldn't slip off during the ride. The ride to Prescott took 4 hours at a walking pace. Kate kept to the high trails, watching her back trail constantly. She saw dust once far behind her on the main road, 2 riders moving at a steady pace. Could be anyone, could be them. She pushed Dancer as hard as she dared with the extra weight. Prescott sat in a valley surrounded by pine-covered mountains, a town of 3,000 souls built on silver and cattle, and the dreams of men who'd come west chasing fortune or running from failure. Kate rode down Montezuma Street at noon, bone-tired and filthy, leading a second horse with 2 bodies draped over its back. People stared. Women pulled their children close, turning their backs, hurrying into shops. Men touched their hat brims, but didn't smile, didn't speak. Kate Brennan, the wild girl from Eagle Canyon, had always been a curiosity, a subject for gossip and head-shaking. Kate Brennan, covered in blood and gunpowder residue, bringing in corpses like some avenging angel, was something else entirely, something frightening. The sheriff's office sat on the corner of Montezuma and Cortez, an adobe building with barred windows and a hitching post where 3 horses already stood. Kate tied both horses outside and walked in on legs that barely held her weight. Sheriff Tom Hawkins looked up from his desk. He was 50 years old, with a gray mustache waxed at the ends and eyes that had seen too much death to be shocked by much anymore. He took one look at Kate and stood his chair, scraping back. "Jesus, girl, what happened to you?" "The Dalton brothers happened." Kate's voice was hoarse from thirst and smoke and screaming inside her own head. "2 of them are outside, dead. The other 2 got away." Hawkins stared at her for a long moment, then walked past her to the door. She heard him talking to his deputy, a young man named Hal Summers, who was maybe 22 and still believed the law meant something. Heard them examining the bodies, heard Hal's shocked exclamation. When Hawkins came back in, his expression was unreadable, carefully neutral in the way of lawmen who'd learned not to show what they thought. "That's Garrett and Seth, all right. Got paper on both of them. 1,200 total." He sat across from her, laced his fingers together. Kate, I've known your father for 20 years. He's a good man, one of the best. But this, what you've done, this is going to cause talk. A lot of talk. I don't care about talk. I care about the bounty money and keeping my ranch. You'll get the bounty, but I need the full story first, start to finish. Don't leave anything out. So Kate told him. The debt, Clayton's proposal and her refusal, her desperate plan to hunt the Daltons for the bounty money, the ambush in Eagle Canyon, the firefight, Garrett's death up close and personal, the escape in the darkness. She left nothing out except the part where her hands had shaken before that first shot, where she'd almost failed to pull the trigger, where she'd stood over Garrett's body and felt something essential crack inside her soul. Hawkins listened without interrupting, his face betraying nothing. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, just looking at her with those tired lawman's eyes. Jack and Wyatt Dalton got away, you said. That's two very angry, very dangerous men who now know your face, your name, where you live. They know you killed their brothers. I know. They'll come for you, Kate. Not today, maybe, not tomorrow, but they'll come. Men like that, they don't forgive. They don't forget. And they sure as hell don't let something like this go. Then I'll be ready. Will you? Hawkins leaned forward, his voice dropping. You killed two men, shot them dead. That's not easy. It takes something from you every time. Piece of your soul, maybe. And you're already running on empty. I can see it in your eyes. You're holding on by your fingernails. Kate met his gaze, refused to look away. I did what I had to do. For my father. For our land. If Jack and Wyatt come, I'll do it again. Hawkins sighed, a sound like wind through winter trees. All right. I'll process the bounty. Take a few days to get the money from the territorial marshal, but you'll get it. Meanwhile, I'll send word out, let other lawmen know we're looking for Jack and Wyatt. Maybe we can get some help tracking them down before they come after you. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. He stood, walked to the window, looked out at the street. Go see Doc Henderson. Get yourself cleaned up. Those cuts need tending before they get infected. Then go home to your father. Tell him you're safe. And Kate, be careful. What you've started here, it's not over. Not by a long shot. Kate left the sheriff's office and walked down Montezuma Street toward Doc Henderson's practice, her boots loud on the boardwalk. The afternoon sun was warm on her face, at odds with the coldness inside her. People still stared, but she ignored them, too tired to care what they thought. She was thinking about her father, about how relieved he'd be to hear she was alive, about how the money was coming enough to save Eagle Canyon, about how they'd won somehow against impossible odds. She was so focused on these thoughts, so exhausted and numb, that she didn't notice the man watching her from the window of the Prescott land office. Didn't see Clayton Morrison's face go pale, then red, then settle into a mask of cold fury. She was supposed to be dead. The Daltons were supposed to have killed her quickly and quietly, far from town where no one would ask questions. Instead, she'd killed them, two of the most dangerous outlaws in the territory, and she'd put them in the ground like she was putting down rabid dogs. Clayton stared at her retreating back, at the blood on her clothes, at the way she moved, tired but confident like a soldier coming back from war. This wasn't the girl who'd rejected his proposals with blushing embarrassment. This wasn't the wild ranch girl the town whispered about. This was something harder, something dangerous, something that had killed two men and would probably kill again without hesitation. And she'd just ruined everything. If the Daltons had killed her, the ranch would have gone to auction for the bank debts. He could have bought it quietly, legally, no questions asked. But now she was alive. She had bounty money coming, enough to pay off the bank and then some, unless he found another way. Clayton's mind raced through possibilities, discarding options as fast as he thought of them. He couldn't hire more killers. The Dalton debacle had shown how that could backfire spectacularly. He couldn't challenge her claim to the land directly. Her title was clean filed properly, no legal weaknesses he could exploit. But there was still the matter of the letter he'd sent to Jack Dalton. If that ever came to light, if anyone connected him to the ambush, he'd hang. Conspiracy to commit murder. His father's position wouldn't save him from that. The judge had enemies who'd love to see his son swing. The letter was probably lost somewhere in the desert in Jack's saddlebags or pocket. But if Jack survived, if he decided to talk, if he had any proof— Clayton felt sweat break out on his forehead despite the cool interior of the office. He needed insurance. He needed to make sure that if Jack Dalton did surface with accusations, it would be his word against a wanted outlaw's, a judge's son against a murderer. And more than that, he needed Kate Brennan gone. Not dead necessarily. That was too risky now, too suspicious with two bodies already in town, but discredited, ruined, broken, forced to sell and leave Arizona territory forever. An idea began to form. It was ugly. It required him to sacrifice his pride to admit he'd been wrong about her. But it might work. It might be the perfect play. Clayton left the land office and walked 3 blocks to his father's courthouse, a 2-story stone building that dominated the town square. Judge Thaddeus Morrison was in chambers reviewing case files, his reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked up when Clayton entered, and his expression was not welcoming. There'd been tension between them since Kate's last rejection, since Clayton had come home drunk and angry and said things he shouldn't have. "I thought you were working on the Henderson estate settlement." I am. But Father, I need to talk to you about something important." Clayton closed the door, sat without being invited. "It's about Kate Brennan." The judge's expression hardened like concrete setting. "The woman who just brought in 2 dead outlaws, I heard. The whole town's heard. Half the population saw her ride in with bodies. What about her? She killed those men for money. Cold-blooded murder dressed up as bounty hunting. They were wanted men. She's within her legal rights to collect bounties on wanted criminals. That's established law. But think about the precedent, Father. A woman acting as a vigilante, taking the law into her own hands, killing men for profit. If we allow this, what's next? Every ranch girl with a rifle deciding she's judge and executioner." Thaddeus studied his son over the reading glasses, and Clayton had the uncomfortable feeling of being seen through, of his motives being laid bare. "What's your real concern here, Clayton? You've proposed to that girl 3 times. Each time she's refused you. Is this about law and precedent, or is this about wounded pride?" Clayton felt heat rise in his cheeks, hated himself for the reaction. "It's about justice and civilization. The West is supposed to be taming. We're supposed to be moving beyond gunfights and frontier justice. Kate Brennan represents everything backward about this territory, everything we're trying to leave behind. Or she represents everything strong about it." The judge closed his file with a decisive snap. "A woman standing her ground, protecting what's hers, refusing to be a victim. I'm not going to persecute her for defending herself and collecting legal bounties. If you have evidence of actual wrongdoing, bring it to me. Otherwise, leave her alone and find yourself another woman to court." "What if I told you she planned it, that she deliberately lured those men to Eagle Canyon, set up an ambush?" "Did she?" Clayton hesitated, caught between truth and strategy. "I believe so. The timing was too perfect. She knew they were coming." "Belief isn't evidence, son, and even if she did plan an ambush, that's not a crime. Ambushing wanted criminals is smart tactics, not murder." Thaddeus stood, signaling the conversation was over. "Let it go. Find yourself another woman. Kate Brennan's not for you. And frankly, after what she just did, I wouldn't want you anywhere near her. That's a woman who can take care of herself. You need someone softer, someone who'll say yes." Clayton left his father's chambers feeling something dark and hot coiling in his chest, like a snake preparing to strike. Fine. If his father wouldn't help, he'd handle this himself. And he knew exactly how. He'd make Kate Brennan wish she'd said yes when she had the chance. 3 days later, Kate returned to Eagle Canyon with $200 in her pocket, an advance on the bounty, while the territorial authorities confirmed the identities and processed the paperwork. It was enough. Enough to make the first payment to the bank. Enough to buy time. Enough to breathe. Her father was waiting on the porch when she rode up. He was out of his wheelchair, standing on crutches, and the look on his face made Kate's eyes sting with tears she'd been holding back for days. "Katie," his voice broke on her name. "You're alive. Thank God you're alive." She dismounted, ran to him, and he caught her in a one-armed embrace while balancing precariously on the crutches. They stood like that for a long moment, neither speaking, both understanding what words couldn't express. He smelled like tobacco and coffee, and home. Finally, Jacob pulled back, studying her face. "Tell me everything." So she told him. This time she didn't hold back the fear, the doubt, the moment she'd almost failed to fire that first shot. She told him about Garrett's photograph, about the empty feeling after each kill, about the nightmares that came every time she closed her eyes. She told him about Jack and Wyatt still out there somewhere, probably planning revenge. Jacob listened with his ranger's face on the one that showed nothing, revealed nothing. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time, just looking at her with eyes that had seen too much death in their 55 years. "You did what you had to do," he said finally. "And you did it well. I'm proud of you. But Katie, I'm also sorry. So damn sorry. Sorry I put you in a position where this was your only choice. It wasn't your fault, Pa. Wasn't it? I'm the one who got hurt, who couldn't work, who left us drowning in debt." He looked out at the canyon, at the land he'd loved, and fought for the land that had cost his daughter her innocence. "Sometimes I think I should have just let Doc Henderson take the leg. Then I could have recovered, eventually kept working, and you wouldn't have had to become a killer." "I'm not a killer. I'm a survivor. You taught me that." "There's a fine line between the two, Katie. Finer than you think. Don't ever forget it." That night they ate a simple meal of beans and cornbread and made plans. With the bounty money, they could pay off the bank, buy supplies for winter, maybe even hire a hand to help with the spring roundup. Eagle Canyon was saved. The dream survived. But as Kate lay in her bed that night, listening to the wind in the pines and the distant howl of coyotes, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfinished. Jack and Wyatt were still out there. Clayton Morrison was still circling like a vulture waiting for carrion. And the empty space inside her where fear used to live was filling with something harder and colder. She was changing, becoming something she didn't quite recognize in the mirror. And she wasn't sure if that was survival or damnation. A week passed. Then two. Kate threw herself into ranch work with almost manic intensity, rebuilding the corral fence that had collapsed during the winter, repairing the barn roof, splitting wood for winter, working from dawn until exhaustion claimed her. Physical labor kept the nightmares at bay, kept her hands busy, kept her mind from wandering into dark places. Jacob watched her with worried eyes but said nothing. He knew this dance. He'd done it himself 30 years ago after his first gunfight as a young ranger outside El Paso. You worked until you couldn't think. You pushed your body until it was too tired to dream. And eventually maybe you found a way to live with what you'd done. Or you didn't, and the ghosts drove you to whiskey or a bullet. On the 15th day after the canyon fight, a rider appeared on the eastern trail. Kate saw him from a quarter-mile away, saw the dust rising, and had the Winchester in her hands before he got within shouting distance. But it wasn't Jack or Wyatt. It was Hal Summers, the young deputy, and he was riding hard, his horse lathered with sweat. "Miss Brennan," he called as he reined up, gasping for breath. "Sheriff needs you in town. Says it's urgent. Says you need to come right now." Kate felt her stomach drop like a stone down a well. "What's wrong?" "Don't know all the details, ma'am, but there's been talk. Questions about what happened in the canyon." Hal looked uncomfortable, wouldn't quite meet her eyes. "Some folks are saying things. The sheriff wants to get ahead of it before it becomes a problem." Kate exchanged glances with her father. Jacob nodded slowly. "Go. I'll be fine here. Take the colt." She rode to Prescott with Hal pushing the horses hard. The deputy tried to make conversation, asking about the ranch, the weather, anything to fill the uncomfortable silence, but Kate wasn't in the mood for small talk. Her mind was racing, cataloging possibilities, preparing for threats she couldn't quite see yet. Had Jack or Wyatt been caught? Had they talked, made accusations? Was there a problem with the bounty? Had someone challenged her claim to self-defense? Sheriff Hawkins was waiting in his office, and he wasn't alone. A man in a dark suit sat in the corner, notebook open on his lap, pencil poised. He stood when Kate entered, and she immediately disliked him. Something about his eyes, cold and calculating like a banker assessing collateral. "Miss Brennan, I'm Josiah Brenner, attorney retained by concerned citizens of this territory. I have some questions about the events at Eagle Canyon." Kate sat in the hard wooden chair across from Hawkins' desk. "All right." Brenner consulted his notes, making a show of flipping through pages. "You claim you ambushed the Dalton brothers in self-defense. Is that an accurate characterization?" "I didn't claim anything. I told the truth. They came through the canyon. I was there. They were wanted men. I shot them." "But you were specifically waiting for them, were you not? With prior knowledge of their route and timing, This wasn't a chance encounter. Everyone in 3 territories knew the Daltons had been hitting stages in New Mexico. Everyone knew they'd come through Arizona eventually. I made an educated guess about their route. An educated guess that resulted in 2 dead men and $1,200 in bounty money. Brenner's tone was accusatory, dripping with implication. Some might say that sounds more like premeditated murder than self-defense. Kate felt ice crystallize in her veins, spreading outward from her heart. They were wanted criminals. I'm within my legal rights to collect bounties on wanted men. Dead or alive, the posters say. Perhaps. But there are questions about the circumstances. For instance, we have testimony that you visited the Prescott Bank 2 weeks before the incident, asking about your debt, that you were desperate for money, that you'd been refused work in town because of your unconventional behavior. What's your point, Mr. Brenner? My point, Miss Brennan, is that you had clear financial motive to kill these men, that you planned it carefully, set up an ambush, and executed them, and that while they were criminals, they were also human beings who deserved a fair trial under the law, not an execution by an untrained civilian. Kate stood her chair, scraping back with a sound like a gunshot. You want to talk about fair? Those men killed a stage driver in New Mexico, shot him in the back for $300. Where was his fair trial? Where was his chance to defend himself? Where was the law for him? That's not the issue here. It's exactly the issue. Kate's voice was rising, all the exhaustion and grief and anger of the past 2 weeks boiling over. You're questioning me because I'm a woman. If I was a man, a professional bounty hunter, you'd be congratulating me, buying me drinks. But because I'm female, because I had the audacity to defend myself and my home and collect legal bounty money, suddenly I'm a murderer. Miss Brennan, please calm down. No, I won't calm down. She turned to Sheriff Hawkins. Is this official? Am I under arrest? Hawkins shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Not yet. Mr. Brenner is just gathering facts for a potential inquiry. Facts or ammunition? Kate looked back at the attorney, really looked at him, at his expensive suit, at his manicured nails, at the quality of his notebook and pencil. Someone's pushing this. Someone with money. Someone who wants me discredited. Who hired you, Mr. Brenner? Brenner closed his notebook with a decisive snap. I'm not at liberty to say, but there are concerns, serious concerns about vigilante justice and the erosion of the rule of law in this territory. Kate laughed, a bitter sound without humor. The rule of law? Right. The same law that let Clayton Morrison proposition me 3 times, each time more insistent. The same law that looks the other way when rich men buy land from desperate people for pennies on the dollar. That law. I think we're done here, Brenner said coldly. Sheriff, I'll need to examine the bodies before they're buried, and I'll need detailed statements from anyone who might have information about Miss Brennan's activities before and after the incident. He left without another word, his expensive boots loud on the wooden floor. Kate sank back into the chair, shaking with fury and something close to fear. Who's behind this? She asked Hawkins. The sheriff sighed, rubbed his face with both hands. I don't know for certain, but Brenner was hired by a private citizen, not the territorial government, someone with money and connections, someone who wants you in trouble. Clayton. I can't prove it, but yeah, that'd be my guess. Hawkins leaned forward, his voice dropping. Kate, you need to be careful, real careful. If they can make a case that you murdered those men in cold blood, you could hang. The territorial courts don't look kindly on vigilante justice, especially when there's political pressure involved. On what evidence I told the truth? Everything happened exactly as I described. Truth doesn't always matter when money's involved. Clayton's father is still a judge, still respected. If they push this, if they make enough noise, the territorial authorities might have to act just to avoid the appearance of favoritism. He looked at her with something like sympathy. Is there anything at all that might support their version? Any reason someone might think you planned this as murder rather than legal bounty hunting? Kate thought about it, about how carefully she'd chosen her position, how she'd waited for days knowing they were coming, how she'd studied their route, their habits, their weapons, how she'd set up the perfect ambush. It did look planned, because it was planned, just not for murder, for survival, for saving her home. I waited for them, she admitted. I knew they were coming. I set up an ambush in the best tactical position, all true. But I did it because they were wanted criminals worth money I desperately needed. That's not murder. That's bounty hunting. That's legal. Bounty hunters usually identify themselves, give their targets a chance to surrender, and get shot for their trouble. I'm not a fool, Sheriff. Hawkins walked to the window, looked out at the street. There's something else you need to know. Jack and Wyatt Dalton are still out there. If they're caught, if they talk, if they say anything about being lured to Eagle Canyon, about someone setting them up, I didn't lure them. I just waited where I knew they'd be. You know that. I know that. But how will it sound in court to a jury that's already been told you're a dangerous woman who kills men for money? He turned back to her. Kate, I'm on your side. I believe you did what you had to do, but you need to prepare for the possibility that this gets ugly. Real ugly. Kate left the sheriff's office feeling like the ground was shifting beneath her feet, like everything she'd fought for was slipping through her fingers like water. She'd killed 2 men to save her ranch, and now someone was trying to use those deaths to destroy her anyway. The irony was almost funny. Almost. She was halfway to her horse when a voice called her name. She turned to find Clayton Morrison walking toward her, dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe, looking every inch the successful young attorney his father wanted him to be. Kate, I heard you were in town. I wanted to offer my condolences. Condolences for what? For the terrible position you've been forced into, having to kill those men, the investigation, the questions. It must be very difficult. His expression was sympathetic, but his eyes were cold, almost triumphant. If there's anything I can do to help, you can leave me alone. Kate, please. I know we've had our differences, but I genuinely want to help. My father has influence in this territory. I could speak to him, perhaps smooth things over with Mr. Brenner, make this whole unpleasant business go away. In exchange for what marriage? The ranch, my soul. Clayton's mask slipped just for an instant. She saw rage there, quickly controlled but definitely present. I'm offering friendship, assistance, nothing more. I don't need your friendship. I don't need your help. And I sure as hell don't need you. Kate stepped closer, lowering her voice to just above a whisper. I know what you're doing, Clayton. I don't know exactly how yet, but I know you're behind this investigation. You wanted me desperate. You wanted me to fail. When that didn't work, when I survived and saved my ranch, you're trying to destroy me another way. You're paranoid, seeing conspiracies where there's only concern for the rule of law. Am I? Then let me make something very clear. Kate's hand rested on the Colt at her hip. Not a threat exactly, just a reminder of what she was capable of. I've killed 2 men in the last 2 weeks, both times legal, both times justified. But I'm starting to think I focused on the wrong targets. You come near me or my father again, you'll find out exactly how good a shot I really am. She walked away before he could respond, mounted Dancer, and rode out of town without looking back. If she had, she would have seen Clayton standing in the street, his face twisted with fury, his hands clenched so tight his manicured nails drew blood from his palms. That night, Clayton sat in his study on the 2nd floor of the Morrison house, drinking whiskey that had been aged longer than Kate Brennan had been alive, staring at the wall and planning murder. The Kate problem wasn't going away. If anything, it was getting worse. She'd threatened him, publicly. People had heard. And the worst part, the part that made his hands shake with rage, was that he believed her threat. She wasn't bluffing. She really would shoot him if he pushed too far. The Brenner investigation wasn't working fast enough. Kate was too smart, too careful. She'd covered her tracks well, and the evidence against her was circumstantial at best. A jury of Arizona ranchers would probably sympathize with her, see her as one of their own fighting against impossible odds. He needed something else, something that would remove her permanently without connecting back to him. Clayton poured another drink and thought about options. He could hire someone to kill her, but the Dalton debacle had shown how that could backfire spectacularly. He could try to frame her for something, but what? She rarely left the ranch except for supplies and church on Sundays. Then he remembered something. A conversation he'd overheard at his father's courthouse 6 months ago. A case involving land fraud. A rancher named Thompson who'd lost everything because of a disputed survey. Thompson had fought back, violently killed a surveyor and a land agent. Ended up hanged in Yuma prison. What if Kate's land wasn't as secure as she thought? What if there was a flaw in the original deed? a technicality that could invalidate her claim. Clayton stood and went to his father's study downstairs. The judge kept copies of all major land transactions in the county filed meticulously in a series of cabinets that lined one wall. If there was anything questionable about the Brennan claim, it would be here. He searched for an hour, pulling files by lamplight, reading deeds, tracing ownership back through decades. Most of it was routine, standard homestead claims properly filed and recorded. But then he found something interesting. The original grant to Kate's maternal grandfather, Samuel Harding, had been issued in 1862 during the Civil War, when everything was chaos and corners were often cut. The surveyor who'd marked the boundaries was a man named Silas Whitaker, and according to a note in the file, Whitaker had been investigated in 1865 for fraudulent surveys. Several of his boundary markers had been deliberately misplaced to favor certain buyers who'd paid him under the table. Whitaker had died before prosecution shot in a saloon fight in Tucson, and the matter was dropped. But the note was there, raising questions about every survey he'd ever done, including Eagle Canyon. Clayton smiled for the first time in days. It was thin evidence. It might not hold up under scrutiny, but it didn't have to. All he needed was enough doubt to force a new survey. And during that survey, boundaries could shift. A few acres here, a few there. Enough to include the best water source on the property. Without water, Eagle Canyon was worthless. Kate would have to sell, and this time Clayton would be ready to buy at rock-bottom prices. 2 weeks later, Kate received an official notice from the Territorial Land Office delivered by a nervous clerk who wouldn't meet her eyes. There were questions about her property boundaries. A new survey was ordered. She had 30 days to comply or face forfeiture of the entire claim. She read the notice 3 times, each time thinking she must have misunderstood. Then she rode to Prescott and found a lawyer, a tired-looking man named Ernest Walsh, who worked out of a cramped office above the general store. Walsh read the notice and frowned, deep lines appearing in his weathered face. "This is unusual, very unusual. Property surveys aren't challenged without significant cause. Who requested this? I don't know. The notice doesn't say. Can they do this? Unfortunately, yes. If there's any question about the original survey, the territorial government has the authority to order a new one. You'll have to pay for it yourself, and if the boundaries change, that's legally binding. But my family's owned that land for 25 years. My grandfather filed the claim. How can they just change it now? Legally, they can. The question is whether they should." Walsh looked at her over his glasses. "Morally, this stinks to high heaven. But Kate, I'll be honest with you. Fighting this will cost money you probably don't have. And even if you fight, you might lose. The system favors people with connections and deep pockets. People like Clayton Morrison." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Kate stood. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Walsh." She walked out into the street, the notice crumpling in her fist. This was it. This was how Clayton would win. Not with violence, not with hired guns, but with lawyers and paperwork and the slow grinding machinery of law that favored the rich and powerful. She couldn't fight it. She didn't have the money or the knowledge or the connections. By the time the survey was done, by the time the boundaries were redrawn, Eagle Canyon would be a fraction of its current size, worthless, and she'd have to sell to pay the survey costs. Kate stood on the boardwalk, people flowing around her like water around a stone, and felt something inside her break. She'd killed 2 men. She'd faced death and delivered it. She'd survived when she should have died, had come home victorious. And it still wasn't enough. It would never be enough. She was about to mount her horse, about to ride home and tell her father they'd lost after all, when she heard a commotion down the street. Men shouting. The sound of horses being ridden, hard hooves loud on the packed dirt. She turned and saw Sheriff Hawkins running from his office, rifle in hand, his face grim. "What's happening?" she called. "Jack Dalton. He's at the Morrison house. He's got a hostage." Kate's blood turned to ice. She ran after Hawkins, her hand finding the Colt, checking by instinct that it was loaded and ready. Half the town seemed to be converging on the Morrison estate, a large house on the north end of Montezuma Street with a white fence and rose bushes that looked absurdly peaceful. Jack Dalton stood on the front porch, one arm around a struggling woman, the other holding a pistol to her head. It took Kate a moment to recognize her through the distance and chaos. Sally Morrison, Clayton's younger sister, barely 19 years old, with auburn hair and a cream-colored dress now torn and dirty. "Back off!" Jack shouted, his voice carrying across the yard. "All of you, I'll kill her! I swear to God I'll paint this porch with her brains!" Hawkins raised his hands, rifle pointed at the ground in a gesture of non-threat. "Jack, don't do this. Let the girl go. We can talk. Work this out." "Talk? Like you talked to my brothers before they died." Jack's face was haggard, unshaven, wild-eyed. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "No more talking. I want Clayton Morrison out here. Now. Right now." "What do you want with Clayton?" "I want him to tell the truth about how he hired us to kill Kate Brennan, about how he set us up, about how my brothers are dead because of his schemes." Jack pressed the gun harder against Sally's temple. She whimpered, tears streaming down her face. "Bring him out or I start shooting. I got nothing left to lose." The crowd murmured, voices rising in shock and confusion. Kate felt eyes turning toward her, felt the weight of 100 stares. Clayton hired the Daltons to kill her. A door opened. Clayton emerged from the house next door where he'd apparently been watching from a window. His face was pale but composed, his lawyer's mask firmly in place. "I'm here, Jack. Let my sister go. She's got nothing to do with this. Not until you confess. Tell them. Tell all these good people what you did." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me." Jack's hand shook, making Sally cry out in fear. "You paid me $500 to kill Kate Brennan and make it look like an accident. You said she had land you wanted, good land with water. You gave me her schedule, her habits, everything. And when we went to do the job, she was waiting. She killed Garrett, Seth, and Wyatt because you set us up. You used us as weapons." "That's insane. I have your letter." Jack reached into his pocket with his free hand, awkwardly pulled out a folded paper. "Right here, in your handwriting, telling us where to find her, when to strike, how to make it look like bandits stumbled on an isolated ranch. Evidence of conspiracy to commit murder." Clayton's composure cracked like thin ice. "You're lying. That's not my letter. That's a forgery." "Am I?" "Then let's have the sheriff read it. Let's see what the town thinks of Judge Morrison's boy trying to murder a woman for her land." Kate pushed through the crowd, her heart pounding. "Jack, let the girl go. This is between you and Clayton. She's innocent. She didn't do anything." Jack's wild eyes found hers. For a moment something like recognition passed between them. Two people who'd been used as pieces in someone else's game. You're the reason my brothers are dead." "No. Clayton is. He used us both. Used you as weapons, used me as a target. But Sally Morrison had nothing to do with it. She's just a girl. Let her go." For a long moment Jack wavered. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, he pushed Sally away. She stumbled off the porch into her father's arms. Judge Morrison, who'd arrived moments before, held his daughter tight, his face a mask of relief and rage. "Now," Jack said, the gun swinging toward Clayton, "you're going to confess. Every detail. Or I'll kill you where you stand, consequences be damned." "Jack," Sheriff Hawkins said carefully, "don't. You kill him, you hang. Is that what your brothers would want? More death?" "My brothers are dead because of him." Jack's voice broke raw with grief. "He needs to pay. Someone needs to pay." "And he will," Kate said quietly, stepping forward. "But the right way. Through the law. Give the sheriff that letter. Let it speak for itself. Let everyone see what Clayton really is." Jack looked at her. Really looked at her. Saw not an enemy, but another victim of Clayton's schemes. Slowly, his hand trembling, he lowered the gun. "All right," he said. "All right. Here." He tossed the letter to Hawkins. "Read it. Read what he is." Hawkins unfolded the paper, read it silently, and his face went hard as stone. He looked up at Clayton with something close to disgust. "This true, Mr. Morrison?" Clayton said nothing, his lawyer's instincts telling him to stay silent. "Mr. Morrison?" Judge Thaddeus Morrison's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Is this true? Did you hire these men to murder Kate Brennan?" Clayton's facade crumbled completely. He looked at his father, at the crowd, at Kate standing there alive and accusing, and he ran. He made it 3 steps before Jack's bullet took him in the leg. He went down screaming, clutching at his thigh where blood poured between his fingers. Jack stood over him, gun aimed at his head, finger tightening on the trigger. "Jack, no!" Kate shouted, running forward. Jack looked at her, confusion and pain warring on his face. Why Why should I spare him? He killed my brothers as surely as if he'd pulled the trigger himself. Because if you kill him, you're no better than he is. And because he needs to live with what he's done. Death's too easy. Let him face his father. Let him face the law. Let him face himself every day knowing he failed, knowing everyone knows what he is. Jack's hand trembled. The gun wavered. Then slowly he lowered it. You're right, he said, his voice hollow. Death's too easy for him. He dropped the pistol and raised his hands. Sheriff, I'm surrendering. I'll stand trial for whatever crimes I've committed. Kidnapping, assault, all of it. But that letter goes into evidence. Clayton Morrison answers for his crimes too. Hawkins nodded grimly. Fair enough. Deputy, take Mr. Dalton into custody. Doc Henderson see to Clayton's leg. He looked at Judge Morrison, and for once the respect in his voice was tinged with pity. Your Honor, I'm sorry, but your son's under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. The judge's face was ashen, every one of his 62 years visible in the lines and sagging skin. He looked at Clayton bleeding on the ground, whimpering and crying, and something died in his eyes. Do your duty, Sheriff. The next hours were a blur of statements and evidence gathering. Clayton was carried to Doc Henderson's surgery, then transported to a cell once the bullet was removed. Jack was locked in a different cell. And Kate found herself in the sheriff's office again, this time telling a very different story. By evening, the truth was spreading through Prescott like wildfire. Clayton had hired the Daltons to kill Kate Brennan. When that failed, when Kate had killed two of them instead, he'd tried to destroy her through the law. The land survey challenge was withdrawn when Walsh discovered Clayton had been the one to file the complaint. The investigation into her conduct was dropped when Brenner admitted he'd been paid by Clayton to find evidence, any evidence, to use against her. Judge Thaddeus Morrison resigned his position that night, effective immediately. He couldn't serve justice when his own son had so thoroughly betrayed it. He visited Kate at the hotel where she was staying, and the old man looked like he'd aged 20 years in a single day. Miss Brennan, his voice was thick, unsteady, I owe you an apology, more than an apology. You saved my daughter's life today. If there's anything I can do, anything at all. There is, Kate said. Make sure Jack Dalton gets a fair trial. He made mistakes, terrible mistakes. But he tried to do the right thing in the end. He could have killed Clayton, could have killed me. But he didn't. That should count for something. I'll see to it personally. I may not be a judge anymore, but I still have influence. He paused at the door. You're a remarkable woman, Miss Brennan. My son was a fool not to see it, but then my son was a fool about many things. 2 months later, Kate sat in the Prescott courthouse gallery as verdicts were read. The courtroom was packed, standing room only half the territory wanting to see how the Morrison scandal would end. Clayton Morrison was sentenced to 15 years in Yuma Territorial Prison for conspiracy to commit murder. He'd tried to claim the letter was a forgery, that Jack Dalton had fabricated it for revenge. But handwriting experts had examined it, compared it to Clayton's legal documents, and confirmed it was genuine. Jack Dalton received 10 years for kidnapping and assault. But the judge, a man brought in from Tucson to avoid any appearance of bias, noted Jack's cooperation and stated he'd be eligible for parole after 5 years if he demonstrated good behavior. Wyatt Dalton was never found. Some said he'd gone to Mexico, started a new life under a new name. Others said he'd died in the desert, his body picked clean by buzzards and coyotes. Kate hoped he'd found peace, whatever that meant for a man who'd lived by the gun. As for Kate herself, she took the full bounty money, $1,200, and paid off every debt. She hired a hand to help with the ranch work, a former soldier named Tom who'd lost an arm at Shiloh and needed a second chance. She bought breeding stock, expanded the horse operation, turned Eagle Canyon into one of the most successful small ranches in the territory. The nightmares faded slowly. The empty place inside her began to fill, not with what she'd lost, but with what she'd learned. That she was stronger than she'd known, that survival sometimes required terrible choices, that justice and mercy could coexist if you were brave enough to choose both. 5 years passed like water flowing downhill, inevitable and constant. Jacob Brennan died in his sleep in the winter of 1892, at peace, surrounded by the land he loved. Kate buried him on the hill next to her mother and stood there for a long time in the snow, saying goodbye to the man who'd taught her to shoot, to ride, to survive. I hope I made you proud, Pa, she whispered to the frozen ground. I hope you understand why I did what I did. The wind through the pines sounded almost like an answer. That spring a man came to Eagle Canyon. Nathaniel McAllister, 32 years old, a former U.S. Marshal from Kansas who'd heard about the ranch, about the woman who ran it, about the land that was for sale on the neighboring property. He came looking for a place to settle after too many years wearing a badge and carrying a gun. He stayed because he fell in love. Kate resisted at first. She'd built walls high and thick around whatever part of her heart had survived the killing. But Nate was patient. He understood about violence, about the weight of it. He'd worn badges through Kansas and Oklahoma, and Indian Territory had put down his share of outlaws, had killed men whose faces still haunted his dreams. He saw in Kate not a killer, but a survivor, and he loved her for it. They married in the spring of 1893. Had 3 children over the next 6 years, 2 boys who inherited their grandfather's height and their mother's determination, and a girl who could outride and outshoot both her brothers by the time she was 12. Kate taught her children to shoot, to ride, to survive in a hard land. But she also taught them something her father had tried to teach her, something she'd learned the hard way in Eagle Canyon, that sometimes the bravest thing wasn't pulling the trigger, sometimes it was choosing not to. The Colt Peacemaker that had saved her life went into a trunk in the attic. She never fired it again, never needed to. The West was changing, taming, becoming something new. The days of gunfights and frontier justice were fading into memory, into legend, into the stories old-timers told in saloons. Kate watched her children grow, watched the new century arrive with its automobiles and telephones and promises of progress, watched the world transform from the wild frontier of her youth into something more civilized, more ordered, more safe. Nate died in 1935, his heart giving out while he was mending fence on a spring morning. Kate mourned him with the fierce love of a woman who knew the value of what she'd had, who understood that some losses could never be filled. When the Second World War came in 1941, her grandson went to fight on distant shores. Kate wrote him letters every week, told him to be brave, to be smart, to survive. And he did, because he carried her strength with him across the Pacific through battles whose names would become legend. In 1962, at 98 years old, Kate Brennan McAllister sat in a nursing home and told her story to a young reporter who'd come looking for tales of the Old West. "What did you learn from all that?" the reporter asked when she'd finished, his pencil poised over a page filled with shorthand. Kate was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at the mountains she'd known her whole life, the red rocks that had witnessed her transformation from girl to woman, to killer, to survivor. "That survival isn't enough," she said finally. "You gotta live for something bigger than yourself. I lived for my father first, then my husband, my children, my grandchildren. Those 2 men I killed in Eagle Canyon, I don't regret it. They were killers who'd made their choices. But I don't celebrate it either. Justice had to be done. But mercy is what lets you sleep at night." She died a week later peacefully in the night, her heart simply stopping like a clock winding down. They buried her at Eagle Canyon between Nate and Jacob on land that had cost her so much and given her so much more. 200 people came to the funeral, old-timers who remembered the stories, young people who'd only heard legends, ranch families whose parents and grandparents had known Kate, had respected her, had learned from her example, and one very old man walking with a cane who stood at the back of the crowd and didn't come forward until everyone else had left. Jack Dalton had served 8 years of his sentence, had been released for good behavior in 1900, had spent the rest of his life working quietly on ranches across New Mexico and Arizona, never causing trouble, never drawing attention, trying to atone for the men he'd killed and the choices he'd made. He'd kept track of Kate over the years through newspapers and mutual acquaintances, had wanted to thank her for sparing his life when she could have let Clayton shoot him or let him hang for kidnapping, had wanted to apologize for the fear he'd caused her for the brothers who'd died hunting her, but he'd never found the courage. Now he stood at her grave, hat in his hand, and whispered words only the wind could hear. "Thank you for showing me there was another way, for proving that mercy matters more than revenge. I'm sorry for what I took from you, and I'm grateful for what you gave back. Rest easy, Kate Brennan. You earned it." He placed a single wildflower on the grave, one he'd picked from the meadow where her mother was buried, and walked away. The sun set over Eagle Canyon, painting the rocks gold and crimson and purple. The land remained unchanged by the passage of generations, eternal as the mountains. And in the Prescott Museum behind glass, A cult peacemaker waited in silent witness. The plaque beneath it read, Kate Brennan McAllister, 1864 to 1962, the woman who stood her ground, and that the old-timers would say when tourists asked was the truest thing ever written. Because in the end, Kate hadn't just survived. She'd lived, fully fiercely on her own terms, and in doing so, she'd proved something the Old West had always known but rarely acknowledged. That courage doesn't belong to any one gender. It belongs to those brave enough to face what must be faced, strong enough to do what must be done, and wise enough to know when mercy matters more than vengeance. That was Kate's legacy. Not the men she'd killed, but the thousands she'd touched with her example. Her children, her grandchildren. Everyone who heard her story and understood that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves. The West faded into history, but the values remained. Honor, courage, justice, mercy. And somewhere in all of that, Kate Brennan lived on. Not as a killer or a hero, but as something simpler and more profound. A woman who did what she had to do, paid the price, and chose to live with grace rather than bitterness, with love rather than hate. That was her final victory. And as the last light faded from Eagle Canyon on the day of her funeral, you could almost hear, carried on the wind, the echo of an old Texas Ranger's voice, "Aim small, miss small, Katie girl," and she had. In every way that mattered she had.